I think this is going to be potentially quite a controversial one, but hear me out, because today we're going to be talking about doctors' pay, and this is what I think that all members of the public and medical students should know about doctors' pay. Now, before we begin, I know that many of you will have seen the title and you'll have instant reactions to that title. There's going to be a lot of immediate responses, such as what about nurses, what about HCAs, what about porters, what about paramedics, what about cleaners and lab workers and everyone else in the NHS who makes less money than you do. And I promise, hands up, that I will come to that, but please hear me out first. My name is Ollie, I'm a junior doctor living and working in the northeast of England, and in this video I'm going to tell you why doctors in general, but especially junior doctors, aren't paid enough. So as a place to start, let's think about the selection and training for a new doctor. To become a doctor at all, you'll need to complete a minimum 5 years of university level education, often more than that in practice once you factor in things like extra degrees that people often take either before or during medical school, alongside having consistently excellent grades, test performance, and a very competitive CV before you even get into medical school. After that, once you've completed your undergraduate degree and you enter the world of work as a brand new doctor, you'll start out on a salary of £28,808. This is the wage per year as a basic salary. Now, to help put that number into perspective, the average UK graduate salary, so there's somebody who goes to university, gets a degree and then starts working, is £24,000 per year. For some other comparator professions, a newly qualified Band 5 nurse, that is somebody who completes a 3-year undergraduate nursing degree, will earn £25,000 per year in the NHS. The average NHS dentist, who will do 5 years, starts on £32,000 base salary. In real terms, just to give the caveat here, because junior doctors are contracted for 48 hours a week as opposed to 40 or 37.5, whatever your normal working week is, the final amount is going to be higher than that 28,808. And then finally, once you move from your first year of practice into your second year, so you're a foundation year 2 doctor, your basic salary goes up to £33,345 a year. Now, on the face of it, I know the reaction, those numbers actually seem quite good, especially when compared to those other starting salaries. And I fully accept that. Compared to the basic salary of other roles, even in the healthcare space, those are good numbers. But it's at this point that I'd then ask you to come back and actually think about what medical training looks like. Let's assume that someone completes the minimum investment, which is 5 years at medical school. You're incurring £9,250 of tuition fees a year, which most people will take out as a loan, which accrues compound interest all through your course, plus maintenance loans of several £1,000s to actually live off each year. And this means that even choosing to go to medical school at all is functionally incredibly expensive. And because of how student loans are set up now, I and the majority of my colleagues will be paying off 9% of our income above the repayment threshold, obviously, for the rest of our working lives, because that tuition fee debt is so significant that you could never feasibly hope to pay it off. It accrues compound interest too quickly. Now, the first really major thing that I need you to understand is inflation. And the rub is that for virtually all NHS staff, our pay has not kept up with inflation since 2010, effectively, meaning that what we've actually seen in the real world is real terms pay cuts. And this means, for example, a junior doctor like me, who started working in 2021, is now working in 2022, I'm effectively now being paid 22.4% less than my colleagues who graduated 12 years ago. This essentially being the average figure that junior doctor pay has been eroded by in that time. The job is the same, the responsibilities are the same, and there's more medicine to know than ever before. But the salary simply hasn't been kept up with inflation, which means that the value of that pay is less. And on screen now, I'm going to show you 2 illustrations which are made by my colleague, Dr. Saira Asher, the finance medic, who's coming on the channel very soon, because I think this demonstrates the problem better than I can. We're working at an effective shortfall of £8,100 per year simply due to the effects of inflation. And I would ask you to think how significantly this immediate shortfall actually affects a young doctor throughout their working career. The second talking point is that of expenses for junior doctors. I am responsible for my own professional registration that I have to pay every year to the General Medical Council simply to be able to keep working as a doctor. I'm also responsible for my own exam fees, medico-legal indemnity, courses, qualifications that I need, and so on. My employer, or the NHS, does not pay for any of these things, even though I am required to have them. Just this past month, I've booked my first of the surgical collegiate exams, which are run by the Royal College of Surgeons, which has cost me just over £500 to sit. It will cost me another £500 if I need to set it again, and another £500 every time after that. And many of you may not realise this, but you actually need these exams if you want to train as a surgeon, and in fact, all medical specialties have exams that you are required to sit in order to be able to train in that specialty at all. So this exam is compulsory. I cannot progress in my training without it, yet I and all other junior doctors have to pay for it out of our own pocket. And the same applies for the second part of the exam, the Part B, which costs twice as much. Equally, I'm having to find £3,000 to pay for a qualification in medical education. Now that's a bit different because strictly speaking, it's not something I need, but because the specialty that I want to do is very competitive, I don't stand a reasonable chance of getting into training without such a qualification, and so I have to pay for it. And I appreciate this is highly person specific, but if this situation continues to get worse, it will basically become the case that only the very well off can actually afford to go into very competitive specialties, and the rest are doomed to be GPs or other specialties that struggle to recruit, which means you're going to see a widening class difference even among doctors. In the private sector, of course, if I were an accountant or a lawyer or something like that, all of these exams would be paid for, but not in the NHS. And the next thing to understand is that for most of our career, doctors have a monopsony employer, which is the NHS. And this actually stops you from working to your market value for the vast majority of your career. Just so we're clear, a monopoly describes a situation in which there is only one seller of a service or product and is deemed to be bad for the economy usually. A monopsony is instead a situation where there is only one buyer. And this comes from the fact that in the UK you cannot train as a doctor outside of the NHS. That is to say, you can't go and work for a private health firm and train as a registrar and ultimately become a consultant. You are locked into NHS training contracts. So to expand on this further, doctors are very, very highly skilled professionals, relatively speaking, who assume very large amounts of personal and legal risk simply by going to work, and there are relatively, for our population size, very few of them in the UK per head of the population. Indeed, it takes virtually your entire youth to train as a doctor in most specialties, and most won't reach consultancy level before their mid to late 30s. That's how long the training pathways take. And under normal circumstances, because of the length of training, the quality of candidate you have to be to even get near the training process, the ongoing exams and certification, all of this, in most systems this would make doctors a very, very expensive service, and thus doctors would be very highly paid as a result. And in order to actually make the NHS work, this market value has to be suppressed. Or at the very least, that is the mechanism that NHS England uses in order to make the National Health Service free at the point of use. We all know, even before we go in, that doctors and other healthcare professionals essentially have to be strategically underpaid in order to make the NHS work and in order to make it accessible for anyone in society. I think it is true that unfortunately the general citizen in the UK, someone who doesn't work in healthcare or know anybody who works in healthcare, I think it is true that they massively underestimate what healthcare actually costs. And sadly, I think the way that most people actually realise this is when the NHS, for whatever reason, can't or won't give them the healthcare that they either need or feel they need, they end up paying for private healthcare, and they are astonished by market costs. Because then we're obviously into the realms of private healthcare, and those are market forces at work. This is what things would cost if it were not for the NHS. Now, of course, I do have to address the elephant in the room, which is that will my earnings get better as I progress in my career? Yes, of course they will. This is true of roles in most industries, and it's certainly true of doctors, because the NHS consultant base salary is £84,000 a year. That's a huge amount of money, and I know it is a huge amount of money, especially compared to the median salary in the UK. But what I would ask everyone to try and remember and understand about medical training is that in order to turn somebody into a medical or a surgical consultant, You are essentially asking somebody to dedicate their entire lives and make enormous, enormous sacrifices to get to that level. Because that's what a consultant is. It is years upon years upon years of training and experience and making medicine their entire lives. And you can't get a medical consultant any other way. And this is the reason why, for example, surgical registrars often effectively live at the hospital for large portions of their lives. And at the risk of sounding a bit elitist, this is why I don't think it is fair that we compare medical earnings to the average earnings in the UK, because you are asking those doctors to go far, far, far beyond average to do their training. And all of this alongside worsening pay, worsening working conditions, and increasingly worsening relationships with the general public. All of these things are leading to people burning out, leaving the NHS for systems in which they will be paid more, increasingly going to New Zealand, US, or simply becoming jaded. I think I'm already a little bit jaded, and I've only been working as a doctor for 6 months. And I'm genuinely afraid of a bit of public resentment for making this video, but this is how the situation is. And coming back to how I started this video, I think there's going to be a lot of whataboutism. What about nurses? What about care assistants? What about HCAs? What about porters? What about cleaners? I completely agree. We are all underpaid and undervalued, strategically, in fact. But as with all roles in the NHS, you need doctors, especially at that high level, because those are the people who assume ultimate responsibility for patient care that happens in the hospital. And you need those people to be as motivated and dedicated to patient care as possible. Otherwise, ultimately, it is all of our loved ones that are going to suffer. And the sad truth of it is that if things continue as they are, then the sacrifice isn't going to be worth it anymore. Think about how people would perceive that. Imagine that headline plastered on the Daily Mail tomorrow morning. Greedy doctors ask for 22% pay rise. Like, there would be public outcry. But to reiterate, that is just to bring our salary back in line with inflation. That's not a pay increase, that's just restoration. So what does all of this mean? I do think that in reality, industrial action, strikes and removal of patient care are coming. I don't know when, but I think they are coming. And speaking personally for myself, I think I would strike if it came to it, because without a long-term pay uplift, or at the very least, pay restoration just to keep us up with inflation, which is all a lot of us want, the situation is just going to get worse and worse and worse every year. All of us, healthcare workers and the public, need to hold the government accountable for knowingly throttling the NHS and underfunding it year on year on year. Huge chunks of the NHS have already been privatised, whether you realise it or not, and that is a slope that we are continuing to roll down and picking up momentum. So there we go, that's my little rant over. I'm sure lots of you are going to say that I'm very entitled and that I'm punching down on other professions, I'm not looking out for healthcare colleagues, and maybe all of those things are true, but this is the reality of the situation and things are getting worse. Things need to change. I've left some links in the description below that explain the situation more fully. If you're a junior doctor, I would advise signing up as a voting member of the British Medical Association, our trade union, and getting involved and making your thoughts known. Thank you all, take care.